Welcome back to Pop Goes the 60s, ladies and gentlemen. I am Matt Williamson, and I have a special guest today. This is a guest that I will call Beatles Public Enemy number two. This is Geoffrey Giuliano. Jeffrey, thank you for joining me today.
It's my pleasure. This is the realization of a dream I've had for a long time to be on your show.
Oh, well, thank you. You'll have to forgive the label here, Public Enemy number two. That would be after only Albert Goldman. So there's a reputation
I thought you meant Mark David Chapman.
No, actually, I'm going to stick to the writers here. And for my viewers who are like wondering, well, why would you be interviewing Geoffrey Giuliano? Well, I've interviewed several writers, talked about several books. And I want to talk about a little bit of the writing process, particularly when he came up in the writing world in the 80s, 70s, well, 80s and 90s, really. And then we're going to talk a little bit about your reputation, which has preceded you in life, which is giving you kind of a blackened name in the Beatles community. So I want to touch on that as well. So before we get into that, let me just brief my viewers on just a brief resume of what you've done. So you kind of started, you have always been somewhat of an actor. And I always like to mention your brief tenure as a Ronald McDonald personality clown in the early 80s. But from then you started to write The Beatles, A Celebration, 1986, Dark Horse, The Private Life of George Harrison, 1990, Blackbird, The Life and Times of Paul McCartney, 1991, Painted Black, The Murder of Brian Jones, 1994, Lost Beatle Interviews, 1994, Behind Blue Eyes, The Life of Pete Townsend, 1996, Glass Onion and The Beatles in Their Own Words in 1999, Lennon in America in 2000, and the Beatles bio Carry That Weight in 2003. And since then, you've started a prominent audiobook company, and you really switched to acting full time in about 2006 with over 50 films and television credits to your resume, including the very popular South Korean survival thriller series Squid Game. So did I leave anything out there of prominence?
No, and I didn't leave anything out either when they showed my butt on that thing.
Oh, well, it's amazing that you made that transition, but I guess it worked for you. And as I mentioned earlier, you have a reputation in the Beatle community. I think the main thing people didn't like about you, a couple things, but mainly is you're known for dishing the dirt. That's why you're called Beatles Public Enemy number two after Goldman, who wrote this book, many people will never forgive him for. But really, there's some very good research in this book. So it's difficult for some people, and myself included, to separate the facts from the fiction. So that's really what we'll talk a little bit about today.
Okay.
Now, dishing out the dirt, this idea of you just dishing the dirt on the Beatles was not new. You were not the first person to do this. What has been the biggest pushback from fans and from readers about your work in general?
Well, first of all, with respect, your audience is very happily in a kind of bubble where everybody agrees that the Beatles, how important the Beatles are to them, and they have a certain view that they take of the world through the Beatle politic. And, I just have to tell you that although this is a respected and vocal group, I'm living on the other side of this. It's a minority. What do I mean by that? I've heard from people for almost, weekly anyway, that love my books. There's lots of them. It's lots and lots and lots. And I'll tell you who loved my books a lot were the publishers, because they wouldn't have put them out one after the other. And you didn't mention them all. I think there's 28 or something. There's a lot more than what you mentioned. Mm-hmm. They would never have gone forward with these books had they not sold. Now, I guess Nazi books sell too. So, I mean, you can't put that down as some sort of a validation of the content. But I do want to stress the point that I'm the guy who lives in here, and the vast majority of feedback that I get is almost wholly positive.
Yeah, and I think that obviously when somebody dishes the dirt or talks about something negative about one of our heroes, a lot of people, they have a problem with that. And in the publishing world, walk us through how, when a book is presented to a publisher and you have to provide the citations and where
Yes.
you got the information from, how exactly do they vet that? And when are they sure that, because they don't want to get sued, obviously. So they
Yeah.
have a vested interest in making sure that is accurate. What is the process that they really go through?
Well,
And what do they put you
that's really the
through?
question, Matt. That's really the question, and that, if people can understand this, there a lot of this, not this idea that I just make things up and put them in the book, has to go out the window. It works like this. First of all, for many years, I wrote mostly for Penguin USA on Hudson Street, whether it was through Dutton or Viking Studio Books, but most of my books I did through them. And of course, overseas, I did a lot in England. But they had a corporate lawyer called Baker and Hofstetter, which is like, it's Bill Clinton's attorney. It's this big, big attorney. And they would not publish anything because they were convinced that it was true and that you could back that up. Who are they going to sue? Me or the deep pockets of Penguin USA? And they're going to. I could run away or something. I suppose they're there and they have to pay. So they're not going to risk a nickel by putting out anything that is not true. Now, the things I may have chosen to publish might not have been as flattering as if it was written by Derek Taylor, perhaps, and it was a press release.
Mm.
But it is, I can assure you, significantly more real and closer to the mark of who those people are. But let us not wander into the weeds. How do we publish these books? What is the vetting process? Goes exactly like this, because I've been through it, a lot. Well, you write what you're going to write, and you have to have 3 citations for it, whether it's a taped interview or another respected public source. Could be the New York Times or Rolling Stone, something like that, not the Globe or National Enquirer. It has to be some published in a respected source. A one-on-one taped interview, which is, I did a lot. And in most of my books, I will list those people that I spoke to in the back. And this is where may I have an interview? Yes. I'm going to turn on the tape recorder. They know it's running, and there you go. So that's pretty impeachable there. But there's got to be 3 sources. I get maybe 2 published, as you could say. So there has to be 3 concrete sources before they're going to gamble their money. Mm-hmm. And we're going to talk about a situation with Magic Alex Mardas where they gambled and they lost because they chickened out when they didn't have to. But well, that's something I know we both want to talk about, Magic Alex, and what he did to my last big book for Sidgwick and Jackson. Anyway, attorneys always err on the side of extreme conservatism. Mm. And even when you show them the interview, and maybe you show them George Harrison talking on which I did once, from the anthology, and you show something published by Club Sandwich, McCartney's thing, or the LA Times, or really not pretty obvious, reasonable places for something to be published, they're still skeptical, and they don't want to say yes. Mm-hmm. And in fact, to cover themselves, I've never actually heard them say yes. What they say is to the publisher, well, we think that this should be trimmed perhaps, but we're going to leave it to you, which is as close as they get to saying, yeah, it's okay, do it. Okay. Because that's not the nature of attorneys. They just won't talk like that. So it can be brought up to them later if there's a problem. So that's how it goes. So I have never, ever made up any lie about anybody that I published, not only because everybody can get sued and your career can be over, but I don't have any interest in so doing. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's enough to say, that you don't need to manufacture stuff, and you couldn't if you wanted to. Mm-hmm. Not with Penguin, not with Dutton, not with Faber and Faber, not with the people that published Sidgwick and Jackson, who did Harry Potter, Bloomsbury. The second book that they ever did was my George Harrison book. And funny story there, just to divert for a minute, they offered me 10% of this book that they got in. I don't know too much about it, Harry Potter. Okay, Mr. Giuliano, we're going to give you 60,000 pounds as an advance for the George Harrison book. But David Reynolds and Nigel Newton said to me, well, we don't really have that. We could offer you 10% of this, something we're very excited about, this Harry Potter. No, come on, guys. What do you think I was born yesterday? I'm not. Give me. I want. Well, it's entirely up to you, Mr. Giuliano. Also, 60,000 pounds it is. So there you go. There's
Wow.
a funny
Well,
story.
hey,
Yeah.
hindsight is
Yeah.
2020.
I wouldn't be talking to you then if I,
Yeah,
if I
exactly.
owned 10% of Harry Potter.
Well, it's interesting, this whole vetting process that the publisher puts writers through. So basically, I know you've done a lot of interviews and you have a lot of things on tape. So do you have to actually present the audio to them?
Yeah.
And that's part of the process?
Yeah. And I presented some audio to you too, didn't I, a few weeks ago?
You
That
did,
was,
yes.
I have lots and lots of taped material that, well, I think changes Beatles history. You know, now listen to this, the carefully crafted, manufactured, well paid for PR persona brand through people like Elliot Mintz and others. You know, it was Derek. Derek was lovely though. Mintz, not so much. And John didn't like him. That's another story. But they pay a lot for that image, man. And there's a lot of money that goes into that brand. And now that the kids are in charge, it's just unthinking. The kids don't even really know what happened. You know, of course, that's reasonable. They weren't alive. So they brand this thing, and the last thing they want is some guy like me. You can ask Olivia Harrison. They want some guy like me pushing my way in there. And, you know, let me just, sorry to not complete that thought, but I just remembered something George Harrison said about me. He said, Giuliano and people like him have a kind of skill of getting into where they're not supposed to be and then reporting on it. There's another word for that, George. It's called journalism. Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of the way it works. So I maneuvered myself into situations to help me get information for my book, but I didn't put cameras in the toilet or in the bedroom or anything. Look, there's a lot of stuff, but George, I knew the most. I think if people know anything about me, they'll know that I had a little more association with George Harrison than the others. Oh, there's so much I could tell you about George and how he, if he were here, he would admit this, wasn't always able to live up to his Hare Krishna values. I say that George Harrison was a man with too many choices, and anything he wanted, he could just think about it and wow, there it is. You know, whether it's, I don't know, those cars he had, you know, and he had like thousands of little ohms hand painted all along it. People will know the car. I don't know about that stuff. But anyway, I'm a biographer. I'm not a press agent. I'm not Elliot Mintz. And I did my job, you know, and I didn't lie about anybody. And, you know, look, it's not really, Matt, too big of a leap to think that maybe, just maybe along the way, one or more of the Beatles might have been affectionate with a woman or sniffed something or smoked something, because that's really about all. That's all. There was no claims of pedophilia or anything or murder or, you know, it was just like rock star stuff and not even that much of it. What did John say in the Playboy interview, that the Beatles were like Satyricon on tour? So, I mean, I mean, unless you're very, very precious, you know, you shouldn't get too upset about hearing that your favorite rock star, even if it was the Beatles, our favorites, screwed around a little bit. And, you know, that was funny because Olivia Harrison got so bent out of shape with my book, Dark Horse, and wrote an article about me. Almost everyone who would be interested in the show probably has seen that or knows about it. But yet when she did the Martin scores, and the basis of that was that I had indicated that George had had extramarital affairs. But yet, if you look at the very end of the Martin Scorsese Living in the Material World documentary, well, you'll say that, oh, yes, Patty and I had, she didn't say the name Patty, but we have had, meaning Patty, we have had problems with this kind of thing for a long time. Mm-hmm. And then Paul, in the same interview, said he was Jack the Lad. I'm sorry, he said he was red-blooded. He was so I didn't invent anything. Mm-hmm. I didn't twist anything. I lived in Henley, for instance, in reference to George, for a couple of years at the home of John Lord from Deep Purple. As a house sitter, I was with Legs Larry Smith. Ladies and gentlemen, his name is Legs. And, I became privy to things about cocaine, for instance. There was, because it was going around. And, well, does that make George bad? Does it make me bad? It was a time. It was a time when people, thought that might be a good way to pass the time.
Well, I think that in the 80s and the 90s, when a lot of this stuff started to surface, in other words, some of the Beatles peccadillos or just some of the rock star behavior that people weren't always ready for. So they shot the messenger in many cases.
They did.
And like, I know there's instances in this book where Goldman, he will string a couple things together that really are not stringable and creates an impression that isn't really true. Now that some of the publishers miss, and that's, I think, a fair criticism of this book. I understand his research was actually quite good on this book, but all this idea of the Beatles dishing out the dirt on the Beatles privately, some people just take offense to that. They think that it's right. Like cheesy journalism or it's unethical journalism. And the ethics really come down to whether I believe whether or not it's true or not, or whether the sources are credible. So one of your contributions, this is one book my first book of yours that I had. I've got tons of Beatle books. This is The Beatles, A Celebration. And I think one of your great contributions are the interviews. So when you have phone interviews or recorded interviews that you've done in person, there's not really a written transcript we can go to see that. And I think
I have transcripts of them, and let me just correct you, or just to offer the idea that what do you think my books, The Lost Lennon Interviews and The Lost Beatles Interviews, were? And I've forgotten the others. I think I did about 6 of the interview books. So what I did, like the American Indian, we use all parts of the buffalo. Okay, we don't leave anything on the prairie. I would do the interviews. I'd include whatever in the book, the biography, and then I'd take the transcripts and I'd put them in those interview books. I remember sitting on a toilet and reading the Playboy interview many, many years ago. I thought, oh, that's a nice idea. You have a picture of somebody and then you have a Q&A. So you could actually trace out close to 90% of what I've quoted in those books by going through the interview books if you were so inclined.
And other writers have used those interviews in their books. So that kind of gives you additional credibility, which is part of the process.
Who's that guy who just wrote a George Harrison book, that English guy? He's a kind of famous English guy. Oh, was it Norman? Philip Norman,
Philip
right?
Norman, yeah, he did.
He just had fun with my books. He got the scissors out and he just had a lot of fun with them, Yeah.
Well, yeah, Norman has some, obviously he's somewhat maligned as well as a Beatle biographer for his huge bias against Paul McCartney. And so he's a personality himself. In other words, he's kind of inserted himself into the whole Beatles history, whether he may not realize that or care to admit that, but some of this stuff, and maybe perhaps you included, have inserted yourself into the history to a point where,
I hope not.
Well, I think fans kind of see it that way, or they will attribute certain things to you. Obviously, you've got a reputation. You've been rather, what's the word, colorful in some of your retorts. I know you've gotten into it with some Beatle fans, and
got into it with Olivia Harrison.
Well, there you go. And part of the reason your reputation, I think, has been what it is. Some of that does come from the Harrison camp, particularly from George and from Olivia.
Well, I recently found some quotations of George's that he made when Dark Horse came out. And he did say, now you see again, look, what I'm about to say to you now, I don't think a lot of authors would say because it sort of impugns my character in a way. But George said, this is not me. This is Geoffrey Giuliano's version of me.
Mhm.
When I wrote The Behind Blue Eyes, there was a situation where I was working for Pete Townsend in 1976, and he had left me alone in his studio in Richmond Park, and there was no restaurant, there was nothing, and I was bored, and I started looking through some drawers and some cupboards, just kind of snooping around. I was 18, and I took a copy of a tape. Now they'll all write about this in the bottom. Oh, he's a thief. I was a kid, and I took this tape, and I called my friend. Hey, I want to make a copy. I can't play this. I don't have any. Oh yeah, bring it to me. I'll make a copy. Well, he never did. But I had called from Pete's office, and it recorded the outgoing calls. So when he came in on Monday and checked the messages, he heard me talking about having this Tommy edit tape, and he kicked me out. And but Pete and I are friends. Friends, yeah, I guess we're friends to this day, and we've sorted all that out. And he admitted his mistakes, and I've admitted my mistakes. I will say that you're a lot. I'm 71. Big difference between 71 and 18. So yeah, I took something from Pete's. I didn't really take it. I had it in my bag and I gave it right back. But I'm willing to say that, and I put that in my book. And they say, oh, you can't say that. You're the author. I said, look, if I'm going to say shit about Pete, my buddy Pete, I'm not going to hold back on myself. I made a mistake. I'm willing to own up to it. So he wrote me a letter. And he said, well, I didn't like the book. It was too close to the bone. But at least you were honest about yourself. And I've always tried to be that.
Mm-hmm. So he didn't care for the book. Too close to the bone, meaning,
Too
what do you
close to
mean
the
by,
bone means it was too goddamn good,
or too
in
much
my
dirt? Does it
interpretation.
mean,
And
or
also
does,
Simon Townsend, his brother, said that, yeah, it was a little tough for Pete to read that. I
okay.
mean, there's a lot of things about it was before the pedophilia allegations, but there was some stuff about the grandmother and sleeping in the bed with her boyfriend, and it was a little rough. But listen, I this is what I'm now going to say. What I came here to say, and I've wanted to say to all the people that love the Beatles and have invested so much of their lives in the Beatles, and to you, someone that I respect and I hope that I'm friendly with, and that is that if you look at the paintings of Picasso, you will see these incredibly disjointed, fragmented, fractal images of women many times. Why did he paint them like that? Why didn't he paint like Modigliani and it was beautiful and graceful? Because Pablo Picasso was a little Spanish bulldog. And he used to make love to these young ladies on the floor of the studio, in the paint or something, maybe. And then he would take that emotion and he would paint and he would attack the canvas. And so I bring this up only to say that if you want to understand Picasso, a great artist whose work is par excellence and up there forever, it's good to know something about the man. It's good to know something about the circumstances and the internal mechanisms that pushed him to express himself in that way.
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
I say,
I
my
think that's
position
fair.
is it's the same with the Beatles.
Yeah, I mean, artists are often painted as tortured, and that's where the art comes from the soul. It speaks, and they're able to put it onto canvas. Or in some cases, musicians are able to put it into music. So we know about Ringo Starr's drunkenness in the '70s, and Harrison had
Mm-hmm.
issues with cocaine, and he got Hep C or something, and Lennon was dabbling, and McCartney's gotten busted. So all this stuff is fairly well known. And I
Yeah.
think if you collect it all together, it just seems like a lot. And it's not what every fan wants to hear. And that's fair too. Some people just say, hey, I just want to deal with the music. I don't particularly care about that other stuff. But as you said, I think that there are people that want to know that. And it's maybe a smaller
Well, they want to know
percent.
the whole picture.
Yeah.
Who was this guy? Who was this bus driver's son from
Hmm.
Allerton? He wasn't from Allerton. Anyway, who was this bus driver's son who sat on the top of the bus and played raunchy for the guys and got in? And who are the other guys? And who were they really? I think you have a debt to history to try to, because everything goes so fast that it's important to chronicle the reality of the lives of the people that we love so much. And then I would say to the people who don't like it, why? What is it about you that you can't stand to hear this kind of, or that it's upsetting to you, or to hear this kind of reality, gritty life? I mean, you've had a life, I've had a life. It's not Shirley Temple going down the stairs with Mr. Bojangles. It's life, And I wanted, the Beatles gave so much to me, and at one level may continue to do so, that I wanted to reflect as accurately as I could that which I came to know, especially when I lived in Henley and was hanging around with, the people that took him as powder and this kind of stuff. I mean, it's not the end of the world. I mean, look, I used to do that stuff and I stopped. George used to do that stuff and he stopped. It's just kind of something that you move through in life, I think.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I think most people accept that. You just get a chunk of fans, whatever that percentage is, that says, "Well, I'd rather just listen to the music. I want to do this more. I'm more entertained by the good things rather than the bad." Some people like the bad
But
stuff, and
are
they
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 bad,
find
or perhaps they're contributing factors or elemental essential ingredients which came together to help build the building blocks of the music that we love so much?
well,
I mean,
that's very
this stuff
true.
came out of people, not gods, not Tinkerbells.
That's very true. I think that's a harder thing without them saying it, with them knowing it, or them expressing that to us. It's a harder claim to make. But I mean, the Beatles did talk a lot about like the drug use and how that did contribute. So I mean, they spoke openly about it as well. So I don't think it's too far to take it farther steps about George Harris's drug use, doing cocaine. I mean, I would kind of expect that, you know.
Well, he lived in what he called the rock star belt in Oxfordshire. And all these guys, Deep Purple, and they were all living around there and thick as thieves. And what did they do when they got together at night? They had a few beers and played the guitar, busk around, and did some powder.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know. It was a long time ago. Listen, I have to tell you that I'm a person that was so positively influenced by the Beatles as a whole, but George Harrison in particular. I don't know if people know, it's not something I talk about too much, but I'm a member of the Gaudiya Vaishnava religion, which is commonly known as the Hare Krishna religion. And I first heard about that from George, and I had occasion in 1983 to discuss that for about 45 minutes with George. I know how he felt about that. And, there's a fellow called Robbie Kane who worked for George like for donkey's years, way back from Apple. He was the road manager for White Trash. Was that the name of it? The Scottish band?
Hmm.
Yeah. And I said, well, he used to go and sit with George at the end of his life. And before he left Friar Park and went to the other Switzerland and LA, just before I left. And I said, well, what was his state of consciousness? He said, Geoffrey, he was a full-on Hare Krishna. The end of his life, he completely surrendered to Krishna, gave his life to Krishna, and it was just me and him in the room. And I know he's telling me the truth. So such wonderful, beautiful, unexpected treasures the Beatles gave to us all. And to me, in particular, my religious faith. So I'm so grateful to them, you know. Now, I
Hmm.
don't sit and listen to this. Sometimes I listen to the medley on Abbey Road, and there's a few favorite songs I like George's did just before he died. I don't want to do it, the Bob Dylan song. Certain
Hmm.
things I like. All things must pass. Um, and I moved, and I know that on your, and you may yet to ask this question, and of course I'm preempting. Are you a fan? You wrote me, and my answer to that, Matt, is I want to be careful not to trivialize the affection and relationship that I and maybe all of us have with the Beatles. You know, I'm not a fan of Krishna. I'm a devotee of Krishna. Now, I wouldn't say I'm a devotee of the Beatles, but there was a time when I was just a kid, you know, just some kid with nothing under my belt, and everything was a projection of the future. Maybe this or that will happen, or I want this. That. They were such a great influence on me. But the lasting influence, the thing that never went away, was George's great faith in God and spirituality. And was he a perfect saint? No, you know, not at all. Was he a guy that never broke a rule? And absolutely not. In fact, Olivia tells a nice story. She said, you know, George, this is little known, but it's out there. George would get up in the morning, he'd do his yoga, or he'd take a shower, he'd do his yoga, pray to Krishna, do his japa beads, and then I'd look around in the afternoon, and he down the road he goes, and whatever, McLaren, that was a car, in his McLaren, and he goes off to some Dolly Bird's flat, gets coked up, comes back a couple days later. You see? So this is why I say George had too many choices. Perhaps if we all had that arena of choices, we might end up in the same boat. But look, despite that, he was a real, sincere, wonderful, lovely guy who helped a lot of people to understand, or to begin to understand and embark on a path where they could have greater self-knowledge. Not to talk too much about George, but just to show you how much the great, you know, an example of the great good that the Beatles and George in particular did for me.
Well, I think you bring up a good point about this idea of being a fan or a devotee, and some people can't separate the fandom or that stronger that being a devotee of a certain personality, and then you come along and kind of knock that down with a tell-all type of thing. So there's this kind of back and forth of this not disparity, but a fighting between the two camps. And,
Yeah.
you know, one wants to not hear the bad stuff, but maybe knows it's there. And because they want to honor this person too much, it becomes a little bit more than fandom at sometimes. So there's this fighting between the two, and that's always been a problem. And that's what seems to wind up on, you know, in some of the books and some of the chat rooms and all the comments in social media. You get those
One
two
time they
camps
said I was
fighting.
worse than Mark David Chapman.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's just silly. I mean,
I've had death threats,
really? Wow.
stuff. Not too much, but a little bit.
Well, let me change gears here a little bit, because one of the things that is one of the most sought after pieces of, I guess you'd say, history are the Lennon diaries. And
Oh
I
yeah.
know that you have used that for your source, Lennon in America. And
Yep.
there's been questions as to where you got it from and
Sure.
what form it is in. And let's start with where you got it from, what form it is in, because then we'll talk
Okay. And
about we'll talk.
I'll keep it brief. I'll keep it brief. I know I tend to filibuster a little bit.
Okay.
So I went to a band the handgun, some sort of a dinner or something in New York, and Tiny Tim was there, and Terry Southern was there, and Harry Nilsson was there, and in between, under the table, trying to put his hand on my wife's legs, he was telling me about John was thinking about writing a biography around the time that he left us.
Wait, let me introduce you. Was that Tiny Tim putting his hand on your wife's legs, or Harry Nilsson?
Harry Nilsson. Yeah,
Okay.
Tiny Tim. Oh my God. No.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah,
Please
Terry
continue.
Nielsen. He was always, he was Terry Southern. I didn't at that time. I didn't quite understand who Terry Southern was. Only, oh my God, it was Terry Southern. Anyway, so we were sitting there at the table the whole night. That group, and he was telling Harry told me that John was thinking about writing a biography, and it was autobiography to be based partly on his diaries. John was a little bit skeptical is too strong a word, but he wasn't sure he wanted to just pass everything through Yoko. And we might presume to know some of the reasons why he might not want to do that. So he, through some kind of a communication, had made an arrangement to send a typed copy, which is the one I got, of the diaries for Harry to go through it, to see what he thought, to see if he had, ridiculous to say now, to see if there was anything there that might be of interest, So he sent them the diaries, and I told him I don't know what book I was working on. It might have been Carrie that way. It's possible.
So this was a
But
time,
I was
this
always
is
working
long
on a
after
book
Lennon
in the
died.
90s.
This is long after Lennon was dead, correct? What year would
Yes.
it? Okay.
Coalition to ban handguns in New York City. That's what it was. So we exchanged addresses at the end of that. I had an idea to write a book with Harry. That never came to fruition, obviously, but sometime later, so many years, I can't remember now. I would say weeks or a couple of months later, I got an envelope. I believe it was from Nevada or someplace out west, and it just had the return address. It didn't have a name on it. And it was a manila envelope. And in it was a photocopy of the diaries. So, I got the diaries. A few people had them. Frederick Seaman had a copy. And he gave it to that guy who wrote Nowhere Man. I forgot it. Rosen.
Robert Rosen.
Something Rosen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anyway, so there was a few floating around, and there was a kind of, as there was with my Brian Jones book, there was kind of a race. The pub, we knew that Rosen was working on a book on it, Nowhere Man, and I was working on my book, Lennon in America. I got mine out first. I was a more prominent author and had so much under my belt at that time. So anyway, that's where I got them. I got them from Harry Nielsen.
Well, let me ask you this, because it sounds to me like you received the copy you saw was typed. Who would have typed that for Lennon?
There's some history on that. It was a manuscript. It now resides in a safety deposit box in Milan, Italy, with a friend of mine. I just was speaking about it the other day to him. I don't know. But there it was. And, of course, there's a few ways that people who are on board with the Lennon estate would try to muddy the waters. And one of them was to say that, Harry's dead, so it's very convenient that he got it from Harry. Everybody dies if you wait long enough. And so perhaps, I'd made it up or something. I can promise you I didn't. And, there's a lot of things in there, like that John didn't like Elliot Mintz, and that was Yoko's friend, and that he said Paul and Linda were stupid. And those are the things I remember. But, I did listen, if you think writing some silly book about George Harrison is going to get you in trouble with Baker and Hofstadter in Washington, the hell do you think is going to happen when you try to publish John Lennon's previously unpublished diaries? Man, it was like, wow, they were all over me. So I really had to show them that everything was valid, and they accepted it. And I wasn't allowed to quote the diary. Let me tell you how I wrote it. Let me tell you, I remember what he said to me. He said, Mr. Hofstadter, he said, no one owns a thought or an idea, only the particular expression of a thought or idea. So what does that mean? Well, if John wrote in the diary, I went to 7-Eleven and got a Coke, I would write, feeling somewhat parched, John uh, at loose ends, decided to go to a local convenience store to grab himself a drink. And that's how you
Okay.
would do it. You could say the same thing, but you couldn't really quote. They just
Okay.
wouldn't let me quote
Okay.
really at all.
Now it's interesting because this whole Goldman book that came out 8 years after Lennon was killed,
Yeah.
the, Yoko Ono did not sue. This book got published, and for some reason, she didn't sue. All those years
Well, let
later.
me tell you the reason. Truth is an absolute defense against
Mm,
any defamation. First of all, people that are dead have no rights at all. There used to be a thing that they would in ancient, or not ancient, but in English law of a cuckold. Somebody was a cuckold, and you couldn't say that when they were dead. But now it's just you can say anything about anybody when they're dead. So you could lie. I mean, you absolutely could make, if you could get by Baker and Hofstadter, if you could get the publishers to give you lots of money for a lie.
mhm.
But yes, all of that is true.
Well, that's interesting. So the publisher actually saw your copies of the Lennon diaries, and that's how
Oh
they
yeah,
passed it through, huh? Okay.
they went over them forensically.
Mhm. And they still wouldn't let you quote it because they thought they could still get sued. That's interesting. I wonder
Well, because
why.
the copyright is eternally with the Lennon estate. Look, I'll tell you something that's never been out uh, about John and Yoko. Julia Baird, who everybody knows, I wrote a book with. We don't get on anymore. I wish she
John's half
cheated me
sister.
with
Yeah,
that
John.
other book to
Hmm.
cheat me out of the rights of Nowhere Boy. But anyway, all water under the bridge. There was a period we got along great. And she was telling me how at the end there, during that last period, maybe the last year, she would talk to John and they would talk for hours. And Yoko, it was pretty obvious Yoko would kind of get in and, are you finished yet? And she wasn't happy about it. So one time they were in the office. There's an office downstairs in the Dakota, Studio One. And they were in there working, and Julia called. John was sitting right there. And Yoko said, "Oh, no, sorry, he's not in now." And he grabbed that phone. He said, "You ever fucking do that again? You fucking keep me from talking to my sister, whatever, some threat of violence or something." And it's these kind of things. And, but they're just human, aren't they? And, he wanted to talk to his sister. If somebody would like to know something about the way I work, you can just go to the audiobooks everywhere of my interviews with Ruth and Angela McCartney. And, they were definitely there. And they had lots of things to say about their experience with Paul over all those years. But I mean, I think we're all just human. And I think people are just putting too fine a point on this. I mean, I don't think you do. I mean, you know that the Beatles were men and that they had foibles and that they were wonderful and had fairy dust and is magical and life changing. And how could four guys from the same neighborhood come together like that if it wasn't for Krishna or some kind of unseen forces at play? But on the other hand, they were just some guys too.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think most people are fairly reasonable, but sometimes they shoot the messenger and
Then why
sometimes,
am I worse than Mark David Chapman if they're so reasonable?
well, I only called you public enemy number two after
Well,
Goldman.
that was very kind of you.
Chapman, I
Very,
guess,
very
would be,
benevolent. You're a real
that's in the writers field. We're just talking about writers here.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
There's a large rogues gallery of Beatle villains, I guess. So,
Mhm.
and for some reason, you've been put in that by some fans and some fans
And
of
I'm not.
Beatles.
Look,
So.
I'm not really objecting. I'd like to tell everybody that I'm publishing. Publishing all the books again. Listen, I'm sorry. My mind goes faster than my mouth, if you can believe that. I do have to say this about the books. Some people point out mistakes. No, She Loved You didn't get to number 21 on February 3rd. It was number 19. We didn't have the internet when I wrote any of those books. We had to go to microfiche. We had to go to
Yeah.
talk to Cynthia Lennon, who couldn't remember too much sometimes about those kind of things. Bob Wooler or whoever it was. We had to go to libraries. We had to look in Time Magazine, Rolling Stone, and we just didn't have the internet. So there's lots and lots of mistakes, but nothing malicious.
Hmm. Yeah, I've noticed in my own reading of Beatles books, I would say, okay, well, this is a factual error here. And if I would see a couple in my younger days, I would say, well, this isn't that credible because they can't get these facts right. I don't believe that anymore because
Yeah.
when I do my videos, I get stuff wrong. And sometimes it's something that I copy down wrong, or I don't have an editor to go over my work, so it's just me. So I can understand where some of that minutia can slip past an editor, and just because there's some
Well, there was no
captions.
internet. I mean, that's the whole ball game, Matt. There was
Well,
just no
yeah.
way to check anything.
Well, I'm saying that if just because there's a couple captions wrong, that doesn't mean the whole book is bunk, and that's how some
But if you're
fans
looking for
look at it.
trouble, if you're looking for trouble, you could hang yourself. You could hang your hat on that. Winston Churchill said, "You got to give the dog a bad name before you can hang it."
Yeah. And like I said, some fans will take a couple factual errors and consider that everything to be wrong. They just write it all off. And then they write that as such. I think that's a childish way to go about assessing a whole body of work. But that's what people they like to do that because they like to easily dismiss people they don't like.
How old are we all now? I'm 71. How long is this going to go on? Are we going to take this to the grave? In Lockport, where I lived for many years, there was a Cold Spring Cemetery just near my house, and I would sometimes walk the Old English Sheepdog through there, and I'd see on the gravestones that's Buffalo Bills territory, and these people that were dead would have like Buffalo Bills teddy bears and all kinds of memorabilia on the grave. And I said, Jesus Christ, they've taken it to eternity,
Hmm.
And I suspect that they'll be, that's the way it is with a certain section of these people that are rightly or wrongly so continually uh, infatuated with the Beatles over the course of their entire lifetime.
Hmm.
I don't do that, and I understand it, but it's not the way I would choose to spend my limited time in this world.
Well, it seems like things are for the Beatles. We are starting to age out, and the new fans aren't replacing the vast number of old fans, and
Did you
that's
say aren't?
are not.
Yes, they're not. They're not.
And I mean, not in the numbers. So I think the Beatles are going to become, more and more of a niche over the years. And
Yeah.
it'll be interesting to see how the Beatles' children, who I assume will be managing each individual estate or some kind of consortium of family. I'm not sure how it's going to be done, but I think that's
I'll
going to
tell
be
you, I'm sorry
difficult.
to interrupt. I'll tell you how it's going to be done the way George, what he said to me in 1984. He said, I hope they get a hold of all my crap demos and put orchestras on them. Didn't say orchestra. He said, what did he say? Well, yeah, I'm looking, I hope they get a hold of my crap demos and put them all out.
Well, they may do that. So
They're
I
doing
don't
it.
know.
What'd you think of that, Matt?
Well, I didn't care for it. Harrison didn't care for it either. So, but all these years later, his estate gave it the okay. So, that's a sign of things to come. I don't know what we're going to be seeing in the future, but I think these estates are going to all have to agree. I think that's going to be hard going forward. I don't know.
You
I
remember
mean,
what Bobby Whitlock said about George Harrison? All things must pass. Wooden crate. He said it sounded a little high school, and he said they sent it to me, but I'll be happy to send it back to him. You know about that controversy?
I
You
do.
know who Bobby
Yeah,
Whitlock is, right?
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that I mean, when you start getting to the $1,000 range of some of this memorabilia that's all concocted, that's not really much to do with the music at all. I mean,
No.
and there's obviously some people that will consume that kind of stuff. I'm not one of those, and I think that kind of stuff going to that length, they open themselves up to some ridicule, which they do get. And there you have another fight with some fans and everything. Well, you don't have to buy it. Well, that's not the point. It's like, why would you put that out there? Is that really beneficial to the legacy?
Why is Giles Martin feel the need to do what he's doing? I mean, is he helping things? Is he pushing things forward? Is it something we need to hear? His interpretation of that which the Beatles had approved and nothing else. I mean,
Well, Giles Martin, he's just a
why is
high.
he there? Why is he there? That couldn't have anything to do with nepotism, could it?
Well, he's there as a hired gun to do a job, and yeah, I think it's a marketing ploy to have the son of George Martin involved in that, and
Yeah.
it's controversial. I mean, I don't know that any of the remixing needs to be done at all, really.
Do you
Some
listen to it?
Yeah, some I have, sure. I have listened to all of it. I mean, some I like, sometimes it does work, sometimes it doesn't work. So that's where it gets a
Mhm.
little bit, should we even be doing it? But, I don't know that some people prefer. I'm not gonna die on that hill. So yeah, I don't.
You know, the kid. Look, this will go on for a lot as long as they can, as long as they can make it work and people buy it. It'll go on. Uh, I'll make a confession. I buy the box sets.
Mhm.
Sometimes I get them for free. Believe it or not, somebody sent me the crate, the George Harrison crate. I'm sure Olivia would be livid if she knew, but Liv would be livid.
So she's
But
not a big fan of yours, huh?
no, I don't think so. Well, I was walking down the street in Pattaya, Thailand about 6 years ago, and my friend Dr. Penguin, who's a children's entertainer, about 4 in the morning or something, he said, "Hey, Jeff, what? I got to tell you what happened." I said, "Calm down. Well, what happened?" He said, "Well, I was contacted by Shyamsundar Das. People know he's a Hare Krishna friend of George's, an attorney and a private investigator who, first of all, after confirming that Geoffrey Giuliano, Olivia wants to know what he's up to, what he's working on. They took him to the Oriental Hotel, best joint in town, wined him and dined him, gave him a suite for the weekend, and then Olivia got on the phone. And it was like, oh, we'll reimburse you, or we'll pay you for information on what Geoffrey's up to. What I was up to was nothing to do with Beatles. Um, but what I'm telling you is that just not that many years ago, she sent over, it was a London attorney, a private investigator, two Hare Krishna friends to find someone that I knew basically peripherally, Dr. Penguin. Used to see him not even socially in the recording studio when I was doing the audiobooks early on. So, I mean, that's the extent that she's gone to uh, keep track of what I'm doing. And well, I'll just tell you, Olivia, I'm putting all my books out again, plus a new one called The Harrison Chronicle in George's Words, which I believe, Matt, you have seen.
I have, yeah.
Yeah.
So you're still busy and still doing turn out some Beatle work, but all mostly you're doing audiobooks. That seems to be a lucrative company for you that you
Yeah.
started. Yeah,
And I'm an actor, and I like to, as you can see, I like to talk. I love the sound of my own voice, as my mother used to say. And I have the studio right here. I get up in the morning about 4 o'clock. I record till about 9. I go back to bed for a couple hours, and I edit what I did that day. The other thing is, I really enjoy making movies. I've never really made any good ones. I've been a good actor in shitty movies a few times. Um, but that's kind of this, you move, you grow, you go
sure.
forward. I do. I'll admit it. I collect some George Harrison things, meaning I have all of the Genesis publication books, including that one signed by Astrid and about Hamburg Days, I think it's called.
Okay.
It's very people like, what, he did that one. So there's 6 of them actually. So I have those, and I think to myself, well, what's going to happen when I die? What's my 16-year-old going to do? I mean, if I died tomorrow, but what's my young son going to do with all this Beatles stuff? So I don't have a lot. I've got some gold records on the wall over here, stuff like that. I mean, I have just a few things. It's tasteful. It's not over the top,
hmm
but I don't, and I bet you see it too on Facebook. Is my father died, and I was left this collection, and here's pictures, or this is how is anyone interested? And I think that's the way it's going to go.
Yeah, and I think
I think
there
it's
may be
almost
some.
over. I think it's the big. I mean, they had a good run, but I think it's kind of almost over.
Yeah, and I think we have no reason to be sorry for that. I mean, we've been given so much over so much time, and the Beatles have been generous with their fans, generally speaking. And I think that if we never got anything else, I would be completely satisfied. But we're kind of that's not what fans expect. There's kind of this hamster wheel of this churning out of product and what's coming next. So there's still an audience there for that. I always want to make sure that the Beatles legacy is dealt with tastefully as can be done, especially if it's coming from the Beatles themselves. There should be a level of quality and a level of um, taste, I guess, with it.
I
So,
thought the
and
Living in the
class.
Material World deluxe box set was good.
Yeah, I've heard good things about that one. I don't have that one, but yeah, most people thought that was very good. So I think there's still lots of good that can come out. And I mean, how much of does every album they've ever released in their solo years need a box set? I would say no, but there's always going to be an audience there to buy it if they do come out with that.
And, I don't write those books anymore. I couldn't write those books anymore. And I can tell you that when maybe after a long day in the studio, I'll sit down and put on the B-side of Abbey Road and You Never Give Me Your Money and Golden Slumbers and stuff. And I have emotional response to that. It makes me feel good. It's not really about the past. It brings me into the now in a wonderful way. So I apologize if I upset anybody with those books, but it was about 30 years ago. And the new books, a couple of new books that are coming out, the Harrison Chronicles, which you've read, you said one of the first things you said, well, there's nothing in there anybody can get upset about. I'll also tell you that the first book, and I had a choice whether to go down this road or not. The Beatles loved that first book, The Beatles: A Celebration. It was on the coffee. I was good friends with Derek Taylor. And he said it was on the coffee table at the Incarnation of Apple, whatever that was, in the 86 when it was published. And it was, George told me he didn't tell me. I read this. He said that he flipped through it and thought the pictures were good. It wasn't easy work to deal with George. I remember Legs Larry Smith said something when he left. He said, rightfully or wrongfully, Geoffrey, there are things that we, as the people who love and protect George, choose not to say in an effort to shield him from anything that he might consider unpleasant.
Well, that's to be expected. I mean, that I would assume that
he's the king.
He's got his protectors.
King,
his protectors and his handlers, and that's part of their job. That's why they're on the payroll, basically.
Yeah.
So, yeah. All right. Well, Geoffrey, that was a very enlightening conversation, and I'm glad that you sat down with me here, and I'm hoping that Beatle fans give you another look and come away from this interview with a better understanding of who you are and what your job was when you were writing those books. So I think this was a quality discussion here.
Well, I appreciate that. And I feel badly, to think that I'm 71. I feel badly to think if I had upset anyone or hurt anyone along the way. Well, it was not my intention to do so. I was a young guy. I was definitely on the make. In my 30s, I had young children, and they gave me lots of money for those things. And I appreciate you giving me a shot at telling my side of the story, such as it is. And I feel grateful to the fans who have kept the flame alive, and have bet their lives, really, in some sense, on the greatness of the Beatles and how life-changing and transcendent that music is and can be. So Hare Krishna to everybody, and I did interrupt you a few times. I'm sorry about that. I'm just kind of an excitable fellow, I didn't.
Yeah, you had a hard time getting my word in edgewise there, Geoffrey.
I'm sorry. It's just but the problem is that you caught. I've wanted to. It's been 30 years since I've been able to talk about this, and it's just kind of a diary of it's all bottled up in there. And I do apologize for that. And I think everybody must know that you're the most fair, equitable, reasonable, and charming of the Beatle podcast people and personalities that we're fortunate enough to have today. I'm not trying to kiss your ass or anything. And that's always the way I felt. And I've been trying to get on your show for a long time for that very reason.
Well, I appreciate, I appreciate your patience, and thank you for the kind words. I try to give as balanced of an account as I can, and offer my opinions and back up those opinions with some substance and facts and reason. So that's what else can you do? So it's not easy, but I enjoy what I do, and this is I do this in my spare time.
I love your artwork. I love when you do those covers, those retro covers. Nobody ever talks about that. I love it.
Yeah, thanks. I got to get a couple more done here this year, so I will have to do that. But I really appreciate you coming on here, and I will leave some links below to some of your work. You've got a YouTube channel. You've got other things, other stories you talk about there that are interesting. I'll leave that below too, and people can find you all kinds of places.
Thank you so much again, Matt. I hope we can continue our relationship as friends.
Thank you. I hope so too. Appreciate you
All
being
right.
on.
Take
Okay.
care, everybody.